Hmm. So the podcast and the book kind of acts like a filtering device for your ideal client, really.
Absolutely. Yep.
The Career Challenges Podcast, a collection of stories about overcoming professional hurdles and learning lessons the hard way. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Kyle Werkerly, certified ghostwriter. Welcome to the Career Challenges Podcast. My guest today is Tom Sylvester. Tom Sylvester started his career as a software developer. He quickly realized that that path wasn't for him. So he set a goal to retire by 35. His upcoming book, Lifestyle Builders, shows how to do just that. So Tom, before we get into the book, which I have to ask about because I'm a ghostwriter, but what was that moment for you when you realized, okay, this isn't really for me. I'm not really a software developer.
Yeah, so I actually I had kind of taught myself how to program in high school, and so naturally I just thought that's what I would go to college for. And so I did, I did well in school, and as we were getting ready to graduate, I started looking ahead, and I had met my wife actually the first day of college, and I'm looking ahead, just kind of thinking about like where we're going to live, what kind of jobs we're going to get, and as I started interviewing for jobs, I was like, you know what? This isn't nearly as fun as I thought it would be. And these companies that I'm talking to don't really seem like the environments I want to, work in. So I didn't know how I was going to make it happen. I didn't know what the path would look like, but I said, you know what? I want to basically be financially independent by 35. So that way, if I enjoy a job and I want to keep doing it, I can, but I'm not restricted to having to do that. So I set the goal to retire by 35. And then, my wife is like, one, you're crazy. Two, I hope you forget about this in a couple of weeks and just go back to finding a job.
I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, so when you finally got on your path and you decided, okay, this is what I want to do, what was that thing that you wanted to do?
Yeah. So, I ended up getting a job as a software developer and basically said, well, I got all this student loan debt. I better get something to pay it back. And so I enjoyed that initially. But what very quickly came up was that I found that I always wanted to solve problems and make things better. And my intention was truly just to make things better. But what I found once you got into like the corporate world, I was working for a large Fortune 500 company, is that everyone else doesn't necessarily see the same thing. And they always think you're like trying to take their job or like one up them. And so it wasn't my intention at all. So while I had, my career going on and doing that, I realized two things. One, I needed to build something on the side in case the career didn't work out. So I started a real estate investing company. And then I also realized that, hey, I've got to get better myself at communicating and being able to work with other people. So I actually went back to grad school and got my master's in management to take a whole bunch of classes on just to get better in business in general, and then to be able to learn how to become a better leader, because I knew that was going to help me regardless of what I did.
Mm-hmm. So you took classes specifically on leadership, or that was just part of your path to become a better leader?
Yeah, so a lot of the program and the reason I picked it was because it was all leadership based. So, for example, there was a team building class and it was all leadership based. There was a communication class, which was really communicating as a leader. So everything was a leadership focus.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So have you read any other books outside of class about leadership specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because when I was going through high school and college, I hated reading. I did everything I could to avoid it.
Yeah.
And then ironically, once I set that goal to retire, I was like, I got to figure out how to make this happen. And so one of the things I started doing was looking around at what successful people did to get to where they were. And one of the common elements was they were big readers. And so at that point, I just started reading everything I could get my hands on: personal development, leadership, business. And so, I've read so many great leadership books in addition to taking classes and everything else. And that's really had a huge impact, because the more you learn about yourself and the better leader you become, it helps in all aspects of life and career, regardless of what you get into.
Sure. Yeah, and I've seen that played out in multiple jobs and multiple scenarios, inside my family, outside of my family, churches, just schools where I've worked at. And
Exactly.
It's amazing, because, the there's a way to say this that hopefully will not offend a lot of people, but you can almost look at somebody and be like, yeah, you really don't take this seriously, your role as a leader. You have a lot of potential, and yet you're really bombing it. And you don't want to do that, obviously. You don't want to say that. But you definitely have that moment where you look at somebody like, okay, they're just not getting it. And at the same time, you don't want to be that person who's like, well, I know everything about leadership. I'm going to tell them what they need to know. But you kind of get that way, because I've read a lot of leadership books as well, and so I wanted to ask you a question about that here in a second. But I can see kind of how some people will step into a leadership role and they don't really understand, okay, there's more going on here than me telling people what to do, organizing things, cash flow, which are important things when you're in a leadership role. You got to take care of that, but you also have to lead. And so it's hard to get that mindset going, especially when they put you in a new position. So then my next question to you, since you've read all these leadership books, you've probably read a lot more than I have. What is your number one favorite book on the topic?
Yeah, there's a lot of really good ones, but one that I always come back to, it's called Better Under Pressure. And what it basically talks about, it goes through these three main points. And it basically says, all great leaders have these 3 points. And the first one is realistic optimism. So being optimistic about the future, because we have to paint that vision and see what's possible, even though it's not there yet. But we have to be realistic about the challenges that are going to come up. Because if you ever see that leader out there that's pushing the future but doesn't realize what's going to come up along the way, they set their team up for failure, and they're really setting their company up for failure. So we got to be optimistic but realistic about the challenges. Mm-hmm. The second part is subservience to purpose. So once you know that why, that purpose, whether it's in your business or in your personal life, you have to align and put everything else towards that and really put that first. And if you look at successful people, if you look at really good leaders, they're the ones that have defined what that is and then intentionally align all of their resources, their time, their money, their focus towards achieving that goal. Mm-hmm. And the third one is finding order in chaos. And as leaders, especially now as an entrepreneurial leader, chaos comes up. Things don't go as planned all the time. And one of the most important things that a leader has to be able to do is to be able to get into that situation where they don't have all the answers and be able to kind of get grounded and not only be able to make decisions and move forward, but also help your team do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And who wrote that, Better Under Pressure? I haven't heard of that one. So
Justin Menkes.
Justin Menkes. All right. I'm going to put that on my reading list.
Yeah, that was one that, like I said, I've read a ton of really good ones. A lot of my focus has been on servant leadership, really making sure that you're serving, your team members. But that one is one that I just keep going back to.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I want to ask this question, and you don't have to answer it, but what is probably the worst leadership book that you've read? So something that people probably should stay away from.
Oh, that's a good question. Nothing stands out offhand. Mm-hmm. In general, and I can't even think of a book offhand. I guess that doesn't say much. But the worst books are the ones that just take information that's out there and don't add anything new. Because what happens, whether you're looking at leadership books or anything else, is eventually you get to a point where there's a lot of the same principles. And unless you are bringing something new to the table, there's a lot of books where I'll get a handful of pages in and be like, they're not bringing anything new. It's not worth my time to finish this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I'm finding as well that there are kind of two categories when it comes to leadership books. You have your mindset category, which is great, and then you have your actual action category. Which one are you more of a fan of, the mindset or the action oriented?
Early on it was the action. But the more and more I've gone through things, it's really a lot more the mindset. And I mean, you can't have one without the other because, there's a lot of people that they're so mindset focused, personal development focused. They've read every book, but they aren't able to implement it. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't really do you much good. No. On the flip side, there's people that are implementing, but they're actually, their mindset or the way that they view things is actually holding them back. And that's not good either. Mm-hmm. So, I guess ultimately the way to answer that is whatever you need next is what you should then be reading. That's the biggest recommendation I have for people when they're reading books is it's like, instead of just reading a bunch of random topics that are then going to skew your ideas or pull you in a different direction, think about the next challenge you're facing as a leader, and then go and seek the book that will help you work through that challenge. Because then what you can do is you can read the theory, and then right away that day, you can go and implement it and then say, hey, what worked, what didn't work, and then come back and repeat the process tomorrow. And you get this really fast feedback loop of being able to learn it, implement it. And that's really how you, excel and really take what you learn and apply it very quickly.
Awesome. So for your book, Lifestyle Builders, what was the challenge that you're trying to tackle there, or mindset you're trying to equip your readers for?
Absolutely. So it's people that get to that point just like I did, where they're like, this path I'm on with my life isn't the path that I wanted. And for some people, it happens when you're younger, like when I was graduating college. For other people, it might happen a little bit later in life. But it's basically when you realize that's not the path I want. And it's then helping people to say, let's get clear on what that different path looks like. And for a lot of people that we work with, it ends up being building their own business or building an income stream so they're not as dependent on their job or their career. And then putting the steps in place to actually make that a reality and help you start your own business so that you can eventually leave your job.
Awesome. And you wrote this with your wife, correct?
I did, yep.
All right. So what was the writing process like? Take me through that.
Very interesting. So,
well, when you start with a laugh, that's a good sign that this should be a good story.
Well, so basically, my wife and I are complete opposites, and we didn't really notice this until we started trying to work together. And I'm the natural entrepreneur. She was always the reluctant entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And so eventually, when we started working together, we just kept butting heads. And so I finally started just having her take different personality tests, and then I compared them to mine. And like, for example, we took DISC, and if you put our two graphs up against each other, they were complete opposites. So that was both a blessing and a curse as we were starting to work together in business. But when we wrote the book, we said, should one of us write this? Should we both write it? And what we realized was that there was a lot of value, because we're talking about what you want out of your life. That can't just be a decision you make. So there was a lot of value in us writing it together. And what we actually did that was really cool, we've got like 6 major sections that kind of take you through how to get clear on what you want, how to get your money in order, how to test your business idea. But what we did at each section was to tell a key story from a key point in our life. And first I told it from my perspective, and then Ariana told the same story from her perspective.
Oh, that's cool. I've never heard of that approach.
And with some of these stories, you're like, are they even talking about the same thing?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, so it was challenging to write it together because our views are so different, but we wanted it to be cohesive, but to also know who was talking. So that was a good way of being able to say, here's clearly Tom's view, here's clearly Ariana's view, and then here's the process that we found to actually help you with this.
Mm-hmm. So is your wife an avid reader like you?
She is an avid reader, but not any of the books I read. So,
well, obviously because you're opposite. So you're going to read, the leadership, the real like intellectual stuff, and she's going to go. What directions does she go with her reading?
I was gonna see if you would guess. So she goes like science fiction, fantasy.
Oh, awesome! So we at least have something to talk. My wife goes completely chick lit and like the light reading, and so I'm reading some heavy stuff. Like I'm reading Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. I read Simon Sinek,
nice.
And the Heath brothers, a lot of the Heath brothers stuff. And, I loved all of it, and I wanted to talk to her about it. And she's kind of like, well, I haven't really read it, so I don't really know what you're talking about. So it's like I had to go give her a lecture first on what the book was about before we could talk about it. I'm like, well, just go read it. She goes, oh, that's too heavy. Let me read my Jennifer Cruzy or my Wendy Corsi Staub or Marion Keyes, which was another one. And so
what I learned in, because you talked about Dave Ramsey. So there's always points where one of us, we have an epiphany. Something happens that causes us to have a realization and want to do something different. And when we're in a relationship, what we often do is we have the epiphany and we immediately want to go and pull our spouse in and be like, I just had this epiphany, so you should too. Like a lot of people when they read Dave are like, I'm going to get out of debt. We're going to, sell the car and we're going to, cut the budget, blah, blah, blah. And your spouse is like, no, like, what are you talking about? And so what I found that we got to do is really we had a journey that we had to go on to have our epiphany. What we have to do is help our spouse go on their own journey to have their own epiphany, and then we can have a really good conversation. And if we don't give them the time and space to be able to do that, it's often a challenge because we're just trying to pull them the entire time.
Sure. Good point. Very, very wise. I need to start doing that in my own marriage. So has she given you books to read, and have you given her books to read? And then how has that worked out?
Yeah. She started to read a couple more books. So she's actually reading Brene Brown right now, which is really good.
I haven't read her yet. I need to read that.
Yeah, I haven't either, but from what I'm hearing, a lot of her philosophy lines up with mine. But basically what my wife found was that as we, because she went to school for zoology, and then she never really had a zoology career. Mm-hmm. And so as we started the businesses, as we became parents, she kind of lost herself, because a lot of people aligned who they are with their career, and she never had that. So she's trying to figure some of that out now, and reading. And so that's actually gotten her into reading, because she knows that problem. She doesn't really know who she is. And now she's directly picking books that are helping her with that. Mm-hmm. So in the past, I can never get her to read, but she's starting to read more now. Okay.
So you've written the book, Lifestyle Builders, and you're doing coaching and mentoring now?
Yeah. So my professional career, I went from doing software development to project management and team building. And then eventually the career or the company I was with, I just thought I was going to work there for 15 years until I built my businesses and left. Mm-hmm. And I ended up getting caught up in corporate politics and all of this stuff. And I'm like, this isn't what I'm here to do. So I ended up leaving that job, and I went to work for a consulting company, which was amazing because I got to work with these leaders at all these different large billion-dollar companies. I got to learn so much. But as we were having kids, I was now flying to another city 4 or 5 days a week. Mm. And my wife and I reconnected, and we're like, is this the life we want? Clearly it's not. And so I ended up leaving my well-paying 6-figure job doing consulting. We had 2 businesses we built up, our real estate business, and we have a wine and liquor store. And then from there, we basically had people start reaching out to us because they want to make a similar transition. They're like, I don't really like my career. I'd love to start a business to give myself more options. Can you guys help us with that? And so I was actually able to take a lot of the lessons we learned building our businesses, a lot of the lessons I learned working with all these great leaders, and then help entrepreneurs and small business owners to be able to build their businesses really in support of their life.
Mm-hmm. And what was that process like, going from your stable career to this kind of maybe not so stable? And how, I don't want to say how fast, because it's really not a speed thing, but how quickly were you able to get that up and running?
Yeah. So the good thing for us, and a lot of people look at us now, because I just turned 35. So I left my corporate consulting job when I was 33. So I actually beat my retirement goal by 2 years.
There you go.
But what it looked like was we had really a 12-year time frame where we started the real estate business and we were building that up. And then we started the wine and liquor store and we were building that up. And then when we made the decision to have me leave my consulting job, we weren't quite at the financial independence point that we wanted to be at. So if I had worked another 1 or 2 years, we would have been there. But it was that question of, is that worth missing out on time with my kids? And the answer was clearly no. Is that worth not being able to see my wife 4 days a week? Clearly no. So we kind of ran the numbers and we said, you know what? We were doing well with these businesses. Here's the gap that we got to make up. And then we had already had people reaching out to us. So I just shifted and started doing one-on-one coaching work as we were building up this next business. So it ended up taking about 2 years to kind of get all of that fleshed out. And the biggest thing that we tell people, we actually have a section in the book called Quit Your Cubicle. And it's all about calculating what we call your runway. Mm-hmm. And for most people that want to quit, they don't know when the right time is. They don't know financially when they can do it. Yeah. So what we help them do is basically say, look at how much money you need to pay yourself each month to cover all your expenses. And then let's look at your savings. Let's look at how much money your business is making. And based on that, we can do a calculation and say, if you were to leave today, you would have 10 months runway. That means you got 10 months to make your business exceed that. So we went through a lot of activities like that to figure out how long our runway was. And that's a big thing that we help other people do, is to say, when is the right time to leave your job? And then what do you got to do in the meantime to make that happen?
Awesome. Awesome. And so how many clients do you have right now that are active?
So we have a handful of one-on-one clients, I think 8. And then what's been cool is that as I was working with one-on-one clients, we were able to, 1, help them get really good success, and then 2, really refine a lot of the frameworks and models that we were using. So a lot of the stuff I was doing before was for large companies. So I had to take the principles and then tweak them to these small businesses that were like 10 employees or less. So it was cool that we were able to prove a lot of that with our paying clients that were one-on-one. And now we're able to actually offer a lower cost coaching program so that we can help more people, without necessarily sacrificing the quality.
Awesome. So when did you decide to write the book? Before, kind of after you got started, or was it after you had some success and you're like, okay, we've got something that can really translate well into a book?
Yeah, well, I've always wanted to write a book, and I've got like 10 more in me that I'll get out there.
Oh, yeah.
But so as we were putting a lot of these frameworks together, I actually started writing the book just by writing blog posts. And so I was putting these blog posts, and we were doing podcast episodes up on our website, and just seeing what resonated with not only our clients, but, potential clients. And so I had written some of these, and we're going to just self-publish this book. And I was at a conference, and I ended up seeing a published author walking back to the hotel. So I just sparked up a conversation with him. He was like a 6-time New York Times bestselling author. And I said, hey, you're a coach. You've written a lot of books. I'm a coach. I want to write a lot of books. Like, what advice do you have for me? And so, he gave me some guidance, and then he asked me about my book. And so I pitched it to him, and he's like, you know what? I love the concept. We're actually partnered with a publishing company. When we get back, shoot me some information, and we'll see what we can do. And so that ended up leading us into a publishing deal, which was pretty amazing. So the one thing I always tell people is you always want to make sure you get your stream of income working before you try to do some of these other things. So for example, our book is like $18. So we've got to sell a lot of books to make a significant amount of money. Mm-hmm. So if we had tried to do that early on in our business would have failed because we weren't bringing in enough income. So what we did was we started with one-on-one coaching. Then we added on group coaching. And once the business was really running and we were getting good revenue coming in, now we can use the book to be able to get out to more people. And we don't necessarily have to make a lot of money off the book to make it work.
Yeah. So you're using the book really more to market your expertise as a coach.
Yep. So really twofold: to market our expertise, and then Ariana and I struggled so much with getting on the same page and trying to figure out how to make all of this work. So even though the entrepreneurs that we were working with were typically making, at least $100,000 a year in their business, we really wanted to be able to help those newer entrepreneurs that were trying to figure it out, but it just didn't financially make sense for us early on. So what's cool now is that anyone that's looking for this, it's like, hey, you can listen to our podcast for free, or for less than $20, you can get the same stuff that we teach all of our clients. So it's been really cool to be able to now know we're going to be able to help a lot more people.
Would you like to be a guest on the Career Challenges podcast? Visit careerchallengespodcast.com to find out how. And while you're there, listen to all available episodes and subscribe through Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and CastBox. More outlets are coming soon. The Career Challenges podcast is produced by me, Kyle Weckerly, and I'm a certified ghostwriter. A little bit more about that. I work almost exclusively with business authors. I've worked with authors who are coaches, consultants, mentors, speakers, some high-ticket salespeople, C-level executives, and of course, business owners. My authors have worked for USAA, Vistage, Booz Allen Hamilton, Austin Technology Council, and the John Maxwell team. They want to write a book, and they want that book to help them expand their business. See, with a book in hand, they're able to market their expertise, or secure more speaking gigs, or promote their company, or all three, or maybe even more than that. They're not out to write a bestseller, though that would be nice. Instead, they have years of knowledge and experience, and sorting it out will be no easy task. More importantly, they want all that knowledge and experience to be an engaging read. To learn more about how you can become an author, visit WeckerlyWriter.com. That's WeckerlyWriter.com. ghostwriter.com and schedule a consultation today. And now, back to the Career Challenges podcast. And you mentioned podcasts, so I've got to ask about that. What's your podcast and what's it about?
Yep. So our podcast, Ariana and I host it. It's called Lifestyle Builders. Mm-hmm. And very similar topic to the book. So we talk about all things life and business and everything that comes up when you're trying to build a business while raising a family and creating your ideal life. So we have topics talking about, how to manage your business funds. We have topics talking about how are you productive when you have your kids at home? Mm-hmm. So all sorts of topics for anyone that's really looking to use their business to create their ideal life.
Awesome. And how long has this podcast been up? The Lifestyle Builders podcast?
Yeah, we had one a couple of years ago that we ended up shutting down. This one's been running for about 1.5 years.
Awesome. And what's the format? Is it like this, an interview format, or is it just you and Ariana getting on there and talking about a specific topic?
Yeah, we've changed it up over time. Right now, it's just Ariana and I getting on talking about a topic each week. Mm-hmm. But we've done interviews in the past. We had this really cool series we did called Couples in Entrepreneurship, and we actually interviewed 30 successful couples that we knew that were either working in business together, working on their own business, or one had a career and one had their business. And so we interviewed all these couples, 2-on-2, to basically say, hey, what's the secret to making this work? How do you make your marriage work while making your career or your business work? And so we've had some really cool interviews by being able to do stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And having the book and the podcast, would you say that's really helped your coaching business?
Yeah, absolutely. One, it's a lot easier for people to understand who we are and our approach before they come and work with us. Before that, people really couldn't understand, who are these guys and will I really gel with them? Are they the right people to help me build my business? But now that they can listen to our podcast every week, they know that not only do we know our business stuff, but, we're also goofy and, we're real people. So when people meet us in person, one of the best compliments we get is they're like, oh my gosh, you guys are the same in person as you are on the podcast. So
I would hope so.
Yeah. So that's been really good. And then what's really cool now is that the book is almost 300 pages. So by the time they read through that, they know some of our story and they also know the approach that we take. So when they do decide to come and work with us, they already know how we're going, the methodology and the values we have and all of that.
Awesome. So let's circle back to the coaching business. I got off track there with the podcast, but with your clients, kind of what is the typical story that you see? I mean, I'm sure they're not all in the same business, but what's kind of the same thread that you're seeing throughout all of them?
Yeah, the key is that they want to build their business, and depending on what phase of growth they're at, they're running into different issues. And typically what these issues are doing is taking over their life. So, starting a business is tough. You got to put in a lot of time. You're trying to figure things out. But what ends up happening for a lot of business owners is that they leave a job where they were getting a steady salary every 2 weeks. They had health insurance, they had bonuses or whatever else. And they were working, 40, maybe 50, maybe 60 hours a week. And they end up working in their own business. And now instead of having one job, they have 10. And they end up working not only 60 hours, but 80 hours. And they don't get the consistent paycheck every 2 weeks. So they end up having a lot of this overwhelm and a lot of stress. So a lot of the entrepreneurs that we work with, we're helping them to figure out, what does the business need to look like to help you live the lifestyle that you want? And then let's work through every single week on getting one step closer to making that a reality. So we're big fans of, in your personal life and in your business, getting clear on what the future looks like and then reverse engineering that so that here's what I need to do today, this week, this month, this next 90 days in order to move in the direction of my goals.
Awesome. And do you have a favorite client story that really kind of lays that out well?
Yeah, I think actually one of my first clients when I left the corporate consulting, he was doing e-commerce. So he was selling products online, and he was in a lot of debt because he had used all this money to buy the products, and he was working a ton because he was doing everything himself. And so when he came to me, I think he was selling like $100,000 or $200,000 a year, but he was overwhelmed, he was stressed, and he was doing everything himself. And so over the course of like 18 months, we were able to get him to $1 million business. He had a team of 5 people, and they were doing most of the day-to-day work, so much so that he eventually was able to move his family from Florida to Barcelona, which was where they wanted to live, and run the business remotely. And so like this was so cool, one, because it kind of proved to me that I could take the skills I have and apply it to entrepreneurs. But then it was cool to be able to see this person be able to create really their ideal life from that. Mm-hmm. Now, the downfall of this story is about 3 months after we got done coaching, he reached back out to me and he was all frantic. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? And he goes, she's leaving me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, my wife, she took the kids and she's went back to the US. And here I am 3 months earlier. I'm like, this is awesome. I'm helping these entrepreneurs, down to this guy's now getting divorced. And what it came down to was he was working too much in his business. He didn't align with his wife on what she wanted. And she never wanted to move to Barcelona. She never wanted to do these things. And so it was at that point that my wife and I spent a lot of time like, what is it we're really doing here? And what do we want to do? And we made a shift and we said, we're not just going to help people start their business. We're going to help them first make sure they know what they want out of life, and then build the right business to make that happen. So that was, an amazing story, a story that dropped, but ultimately shifted our direction and helped us help a lot more people.
Wow. That's a great story. I wish I could write that story. So then when you started integrating that into your coaching philosophy and your methodology, how were you able to kind of just mention that, like, we don't just help you with your business, but we can help you with your life? Were people thinking, well, that's just another service that he provides, or like, hey, I can do this too? And, was it kind of hard really to, I know it sounds bad, but to sell that?
It's a great question, and it's something that I think is happening less now because, to your point, people listen to the podcast or they're reading the books. So that's where I'm saying they know our philosophy. Mm-hmm. But for a long time, and it still even happens today, people come to us for business help, and one of the first things we start asking about is their personal life. We have them do a time audit, and they track their time where they spend it for a week. We have them look at their finances. We have them set their personal vision and some of the goals they want to achieve. And usually they're confused. They're like, no, Tom, I came to you because I'm not making the profit I want in my business. Help me. Or I need to hire a teammate. Help me do that. And so there is some kind of walking back and saying, we got to understand why you're doing this and what this is for, to then know how to move that thing forward. But what's really cool with the podcast now is that people are listening to us and they know that our philosophy, even with our name, Lifestyle Builders, that is the first focus. So they realize we're going to focus on you and making you happy and making sure you're whole, because when you're good and you take care of yourself, you can show up better as the leader in your life and the leader in your business, and for all the people around you that depend on you.
Mm-hmm. So the podcast and the book kind of acts like a filtering device for your ideal client, really.
Absolutely. Yep.
Awesome. So would you say, like, before you did the podcast and the book, it was kind of harder to find your ideal client?
Yeah. I think it was harder to find our ideal client for a couple of reasons. One, they didn't know a lot about us, because if you went and looked at what we were doing, it's like, well, who are these guys? They do real estate, but they also have a wine store. But, this guy's a developer. She's a zoo. Like, who are they?
Yeah.
So, by working with clients and by doing the podcast and really just through having a lot of conversations with entrepreneurs, we really started to get super clear on who we wanted to work with and who we didn't. And one of the activities that we've gone through in our personal life and our business is really defining our core values. And, a lot of times people will hear this in companies and they'll kind of overlook it. But really what core values are is a way for you to quickly make decisions. So, for example, one of our core values is collaboration over competition. So we don't look at other business coaches as competition. We actually partner with a lot of other business coaches. A lot of people that actually wrote forewords for the book were quote unquote our competition. But what we've realized is that if we have a mission to help people and other people have that same mission, we're all working together on the same mission, whether we're at the same company or not. So doing those core values have really helped us to basically filter and become a decision framework for who we work with, who we don't work with, and we put those out front and center.
Awesome. So you're very open about it.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the key things, like kind of circling back to being a leader. Early on in my career, I had some success, and I actually let my ego kind of get the best of me. Oh, no. And at that point, I wasn't looking for help. I didn't want to ask questions because I didn't want to look weak. I didn't want to look like I didn't know. And what I found through a lot of lessons and over time was that it's actually the opposite. The best leaders are the ones that are open. They're vulnerable, and they're willing to be vulnerable, and they're willing to work with the people around them to get to the result. And so that was a really big learning lesson for me. And it's helped so much in business because when people see that we're genuine and we're willing to, share our stories, share our struggles, it makes them a lot more open, or a lot easier to open up and share their struggles so we can help them as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I love it. That's great. So when, say somebody wants to kind of get where you're at, they may be out of college already, they may still be in college, and yet they're not sure of what to do to get to where you're at. What advice would you give them? What steps could you suggest?
Yeah. So the first thing we take everybody through is asking them what they want their life to look like in the future. And if it's easier, we can say, look out 5 years, look out 10 years. And we just want them to start thinking about that. And for most people, this is a tough question because we're so in the day-to-day, we're so in the smartphone and in everything now that we're not looking out 10 years. And so what we found is that there's 4 major categories people can think about for doing this. One is the things that you want. So what kind of house do you want? What kind of car do you want? Any of those material like possessions. The second are the experiences that you want to have. So, do you want to be debt-free? Do you want to live in a certain location? Do you want to be a digital nomad where you're traveling all over the place? So most people focus on those first. And then there's 2 other ones that we tell people to think about. 3 is the relationships that you want to have. And oftentimes people forget about this, but when you have taken care of yourself and the rest of the things, you realize how important those relationships are that you have in your life. And then 4 is the impact you want to make. So for most people, their initial focus, and I know it was mine, was I want to make enough money to take care of myself and my family. Like, that's it. And then once you get to that point, it's this weird thing where you're like, okay, the thing that was driving me for so long isn't really there anymore. So like, what's my purpose? And we found that focusing on the relationships you want to have and the impact you want to make, basically helping other people, then helps you really get that purpose again. And so when people start with thinking about what they want the future to look like, now what they can do is work backwards and figure out what are the different paths that I can get there and which one am I going to pick because I think it's the best path. It's like a GPS. Here's my destination, which is the future. Here's my starting point, which is where I am. And we're going to draw a roadmap, but we're going to check in along the way and see, are we still on the right path? Is there a faster path that maybe we should divert to? But we're being very intentional with our decisions.
Mm-hmm. And what happens when life inevitably happens?
That's when what happens with your GPS, right? You got to reroute. And so that's the most important thing we tell people. Like, look, having a plan is great, but the second you get done with that plan, it's starting to decay and it's starting to get outdated because life happens. Yeah. So what we talk about is having a planning process. And that goes back to where every 90 days we're getting together and we're setting goals for the next 90 days and we're reflecting on the last 90 days. And by doing that, we're able to say this big vision or goal that we have for the long term, these are the things we got to focus on immediately to make sure we're moving in that right direction. And then what we do is we have a monthly meeting. Our monthly meeting, we're looking at our finances, both personal and business. We're making sure that, are we spending more money than we thought? Is our net worth growing? If we have debt, are we paying that down? And then really what we're getting down to is having a weekly meeting. And that weekly meeting helps you to learn from the last week and then be able to adjust and figure out where your focus is going to be for the upcoming week. And then we take it all the way down even to a daily meeting. You know, a lot of organizations are doing this now where you're having a daily huddle with your team. 15 minutes and you're just getting everybody aligned. And so we've taken a lot of those same philosophies and said, well, let's apply this to our life, because life is going to happen. Things are going to come up. But if we're constantly checking in on where we're at and then making adjustments, we'll continue to move in that right direction.
Awesome. And you're finding these kind of like quick 15-minute huddles, that's increasing kind of your efficiency and productivity?
100%. Like, so I literally have a sheet of paper that I use each day.
Wow.
And this has my calendar. So I have my schedule. It has my daily intention, and then the couple of key tasks that I have to get done that day. I have a spot for new ideas. I have a spot for issues and a spot for notes. And so by taking a couple of minutes each day to think about and really become intentional about what I want to do that day, and then syncing up with my wife and my team to make sure everyone else has their plan. And if there's anything getting in their way, we help get that out of the way. It makes everyone so much more clear on where we're going, what they need to do. If something's in the way, we're able to address it, not let people get frustrated because they're not able to proceed forward. So that 15-minute, daily huddle, it's one of the biggest things. And oftentimes when I introduce it to people that are busy or to leaders that feel like they have a lot going on, initially they kind of brush this off, but I'm like, listen, this is one of the most powerful meetings you can have.
And do they usually come back and say, you were right?
They do. Usually they're kicking and screaming. Like there's there's been some people where I've had to be like, when I make them do that time audit, it's the same thing. They're like, I don't have time to do a time audit. I don't have time. That's why I'm here, right?
Yeah.
And what we find is that when they do it, they're doing things like spending, 12 hours checking their email. And I'm like, well, let's start going through those emails. Well, this was an email that somebody was waiting on something for you. Hey, guess what? If we had that quick 15-minute meeting, you could have gave them the answer and they could have gone. So now they wouldn't have wasted a day waiting on you, and that email never comes into your inbox. So we have to go through and kind of show them all these things that pull them away from what they enjoy doing. We can actually alleviate a lot of those through these meetings. The challenge is most people at companies, the companies don't know how to run meetings, and they've never been part of really effective meetings. So when you can have these meetings that are same time, same agenda, very focused and productive, and they're actually helping you to drive forward, meetings become a lot more fun.
Yes, definitely. That sounds like bliss. Fun meetings. So now I've got to ask, because you mentioned those 4 phases, and the last one is what's the impact you want to have. So Tom Sylvester, what is the impact that you want to have?
Yeah, I'm looking at, myself and my wife and all the debt we got into early on. I'm looking at the credit card, or not the credit card, well, the credit card debt, but really the student loan debt that we have and that crisis that's going on. And the impact that we have now is we want to be able to speak to everybody, but specifically kids, to say, look, this traditional path that we're all on and we think we have to default to, which is go to high school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, take student loans out, start your career in a giant hole, and then spend years working out. It's not the only way, and it's not the way that it has to be. So we basically want people to do just like you asked, get clear on what you want your future life to look like, think about the various scenarios that will help you get there, and then make an intentional decision on which one's right for you. And that might be going to college and getting a degree. That might be entrepreneurship, and a lot of what we talk about, that might be going to the trades. But what we want people to do is to just make intentional decisions and realize they have more options than they think.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That sounds amazing. But we're almost out of time. But before we go, definitely I want to ask, where can people find Lifestyle Builders? Where can they find that?
Yep. So if you guys are looking for the book, it comes out in October, but we actually have the pre-order up now. So you can go to lifestylebuildersbook.com. And if you're looking for what Ariana and I have going on with the podcast, the book, the coaching, you can go to tomandariana.com.
Awesome. And I know you kind of have a specific client in mind. Is there kind of a specific criteria you want to put on that, or just anybody who's interested?
Yeah, it's really anybody that is looking for entrepreneurship to be part of their plan. So, if you enjoy your career and you're just looking to build a side hustle or side business, we've got programs for you. If you're building your business and you're looking for how to grow and how to put sales in place and how to build a team, we've got programs for you as well. So any entrepreneur that's really looking to build their business to create more time and financial freedom in their life is who we're looking to help.
So, Tom, before we go, what is the one thing you hope listeners will take away from this episode?
The biggest thing I'll tell people is a lot of people look at us now, like after, and, they're like, oh, well, of course you guys could do that because of X, Y, and Z. And I don't want you guys to think like that. I want you to look at the people that are where you're at, and then instead of coming up with excuses for why they were able to do it and why you can't, start looking at the things they do, the way they think, and realize that you can adopt the way they think and you can adopt the actions they take to build that life for you.
Awesome. That's great. Well, Tom Sylvester, thank you so much for being on the Career Challenges podcast with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Career Challenges podcast. Visit careerchallengespodcast.com to listen to more episodes and subscribe. And don't forget to schedule a consultation to talk about your book today by visiting weckerlywriter.com. That's WECKERLYWRITER.com.